Hey there, Scott Morrison, the Kinetic Ninja, coming back at you. For the past 3 years at our competitions, the winners have always taken home a specific custom hold. I've improved my technique over the years and figured I'd share a few tips and tricks with you. First off, your master creation is going to be key. Whatever silicone mold you make and then create others off of, it picks every detail up in that. One of the most complicated ones I did was the rocket hold. Now this started off with a florist piece of foam cone shape. And here is a trick. I love sanding drums. This type of sanding drum was the bottom half of this handle, and then a mold was made off of it. Again, sanding drums are awesome. This is a sanding drum. All I had to do is fill that with spray foam. I then took a couple of our Kinetic Ninja Warrior Shield ward metals, mounted those on either side of my master, and then created my silicone mold from that. Sanding drums, a great source. I went back a while ago and took my Spinball Wizard mold, discovered I could put an eye bolt in it, and then I took one of those handholds that I had already made, sanded off the bottom, sanded a flat on the front, carved in a recess, and again, using my award, I was able to then generate that master, which created this mold, which created as many of those holds as I needed, and I did 42 for all of the award winners, and then a whole bunch of extra for the gym. So it becomes very economical to do something like this, and it allows for the branding and that type of thing. Those particular types of forms are a little more complicated to create. It does require a little bit more forethought at the beginning. You have to deal with the idea of preloading your eye bolts in. You want to pour that right around there. I typically foul up the bottom so that this can't screw out or move out. Grind a little notch in it, something like that. Then you have to preload and get all that set up into it. Making this particular silicone mold is a little more complicated. Once you have your master, you have to also add in a venting hole for air to come out, and then a funnel type of hole, a sprue to fill it up. And then you need to suspend this in this volume so that you can then copy it and pour the silicone around it. We're going to start off with something a little bit easier. The model that I have found is a rock surface that I think is an awesome, absolute awesome cliffhanger. But this is going to allow us to do what I call a surface pour. This is nothing more than a cavity down inside the silicone that's going to replicate a master that you can duplicate many, many times. So this is a rock I found outside in the garden. The black line is actually part of this process. We'll talk about that in a second. Again, though, I want to kind of customize it, and I can't carve or drill into rock. And so take a look. It's a nice trapezoidal shape, very cliffhanger-ish. It's got a little bit of texture there. I might be able to mount it in all sorts of different configurations, but this is going to be a rock climb wall screw-on type of hold. So I took it from there, and I went ahead and created a box to contain it, and I have it laid out with some screws coming up through the bottom to suspend it in midair that is at a specific orientation so that I get the thickness and the angle from surface that I want from it in the final. This is all a little bit adaptable later on, but once I did that, I went ahead and poured in my silicone, created a mold, broke that out, took the rock out, and then created a resin mold. This is exactly like a custom handhold that I would use out there, but now I can machine it. It gave me the opportunity to go ahead and drill in some mounting holes. It gave me the opportunity to carve in a little opening, place in my shield, use a little bit of softening around the edges. I think this is absolutely dynamite. I'm now going to make a master of that. I'll take you through the silicone pouring process, and you guys can kind of maybe learn a few things, hopefully get a few tips out of it. So now I have my absolute master. I know it's pretty much going to want to do the exact same thing I did with this, so I'm going to be able to reuse this particular container box as long as I orient this in about the same place. And guess what? I've got those screws still holding it in. One thing I did note, I caulked all of the surfaces. This is a plumber's caulk. It's pliable. I can take it back out without any reason or without any difficulty. I don't have to cut it away like a silicone does. That way I can break this open later on and get my master or my mold back apart and use it again and again. I also used butcher's wax, common butcher's wax, as a release agent. That's going to help me get my silicone back out later on, and did that. Once I had that with the rock, I was able to pour water into it to the level that I wanted it to get to, and then pour that off into this container, and that would tell me how much volume of material the silicone I needed to mix up, and that's critical because this stuff is kind of expensive. The stuff I use is product Cast and Mold 25T, specialty resins and chemicals. It's mixed in a 10-to-1 ratio. I know this bucket weighs 2.5 ounces. I know that I need to add in my hardener, and then I'll mix that all up and place that in here. But before I do, I want to make sure I have this within my cavity and positioned appropriately. I believe this end goes that direction, according to my O's. Yes, it does. I should be able to lower this down and find a spot where it no longer rocks. Perfect. And now I'm going to place a lead weight on top of it so that it does not lift or move anywhere in my silicone during the pouring. I know I needed 24 ounces. That was the volume of the water that I poured out. I'm going to go ahead and take this, and this will measure out how much of my catalyst I need to add to it. Again, I know the bucket weighs 2.5 ounces. I measured that ahead of time. So if this weighs 9.5, take off the 2.5 for the bucket, that leaves me 27 ounces. I need 10-to-1, I need 2.7 ounces of the cast and mold by weight. And before I put that in there, making sure everything's good on that end, because once we mix this, it is kind of a no-go material. Earlier, one of the reasons I'm doing this in 2 stages is I forgot to hit record when I did that mold. So here we go for number 2. So now I can add in a total of, what did I say, 2.7? Yep, 2.7. That's going to bring me up to 32 ounces. All right, slight camera faux pas there. I went ahead and added in the appropriate amount of catalyst based on its weight. And now I'm going to mix. It is time to stir like you've never stirred before. This stuff is typically pretty thick, but once you get it going, we're just looking for a consistent color amongst all of it, with as much of the white gone and as much of the dark green blended in. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I think everything has blended up quite nicely. You can see it's all pretty darn mixed. Typically, I do take one time and make sure I scrape all of the sides. All right. So you saw me earlier scraping down my stir stick. I'm going to do the same thing. Get all of the material I can ready to go. Drop those into. And now I'm going to pour, without getting on top of the mold if I can help it, around the edge. I'm just going to try to ease that in. Now we're going to kind of let this settle a little bit. In a perfect world, I would go ahead and pull this into a vacuum chamber so that all the air bubbles that I got in there while I was stirring it are going to dispense or disperse. I'm just going to hope that we're going to let it set here for just a moment, settle in, and tip it on over, and hopefully we can get it to just kind of fill in and flow up from underneath into all of the area we want it to. And so there is the finished pour. A little spillage there, a little sloppy there. But we'll come back, I'll show you what it looks like after everything has been cured up. And we pull it out, and then we pour our final piece. Alright, so we've let this cure for about 12 hours. I did make a minor adjustment to the screws after everything got set down. Get that set up, there we go. And now we're going to break open the mold. That's going to get us our silicone, and that's going to give us the ability to duplicate this. Don't need the lead anymore. This is definitely hard and cured. It's going to be difficult to get out of the plywood. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out every screw I can. Now, I don't want to lose the orientation of this particular piece of wood, so now that I have it loose, I'm going to go ahead and start working toward, oh no, I got 2 more screws down here. Getting this one side off. It is going to be super stuck. What I'm going to need to do is probably come at it and pry it up a little bit. So I'm going to go in here between the 2 pieces of plywood and just start prying up, and I can hear the silicone separating. And now I have this part off. Do whatever cleanup I can real quick. And now it's loose, but I'm going to put it right back in. That's going to maintain all of my wood's orientation, and I don't have to worry about things shifting. I'm going to throw the 3 center screws back in. I'm going to work right down to this side, take this end cap off, and do virtually the same thing. Now I do have other areas that I can pry to. I'm going to twist it this time, a little bit this direction, and it breaks free of all of that. Break out some of my sealing here. Caulking, get that out of the way. Now I may be able to start lifting this up already, but it looks like I'm going to need to go one more side. That side's loose, this side's stuck. And again, before I go too far with this, I'm going to put this one back on, at least in a couple of positions, so that I don't lose where that is. And there we go. Oh, must have left a screw in. Yeah, I did. So now, we know the other 2 sides are clear. I'm going to get, again, as much of this caulking out as I can. And now all we have to do is separate it from the bottom. And I'm going to do virtually the same thing I did around the side. I'm going to open it up so I can get to it. Pull out some of that caulking. And I'm going to start prying up from one corner. And you can hear it releasing as I go. And pretty soon, the whole form will pop free. Set that to the side for the moment. Alright, here again, I'm going to peel off all of this crud, the sealant. Set that off to the moment. And so here is my mold. Now I start breaking free the actual resin cap here. Now, where I have poured through, the silicone is sealed from top to bottom. So I'm going to just cut this part right here at the top. Yep. And there should be one down here as well. There it is. And now I can start peeling off and getting at what we're doing. Now, all of this overlap that is sticking out the top, I'm just going to trim that away as we go. I should now be able to start working in from the side, loosening it around. And then we pull out our mold. Now I do have to be careful of the places where I did stick it through. This one is going to need a little trim as well. And so now, grab a sharper blade. I'm just going to go around and trim up again, right on this edge, anything that happens to be hanging over that I don't want. And so now you can kind of see what we have going on there. I have an exact duplicate of my model. Looks like I got a series of air bubbles. We'll have to see how that turns out on my final. This is the problem without doing a vacuum chamber kind of situation, but hopefully it'll all turn out. I don't believe I will need the screws in the bottom anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and take those out. And now we can go ahead and pour our very first hold out of this mold. I'm going to go ahead and just clean it off, see what we got going on around here. There's a little bit of smudge that's filling some areas. Knock that down. And then we need to create, this is a little floppy and a loose once we fill it with a material. So I need to go ahead and put my walls back on. I'm going to go ahead and put this in this environment. I am noting that the 0 or the mark that I have in there is aligned. That keeps everything, again, if this was somewhat out of square in any direction, it might be a problem. Now I am going to go ahead and put in a couple of screws here, but at this point in time, we really don't need a lot of this. I'm going to put one screw on this end, and I'm going to put one screw in the middle of this board, and that should be plenty to hold that all together. Alright? Yeah. Alright. Now earlier, when I made my master component, I had a pour volume of 17 ounces to fill this. So that means now in my resin material, I need to mix roughly 8.5 ounces of each one of the components. It's a 50 to 50 mix. And then stir them and add them in here. Now I use, again, Specialty Resins is the brand. This is the Color Pro. This allows me to put in any pigmenting or some dyes that you can get from them as well. Let's go ahead and get ourselves prepped and ready here. I've got a couple of brand new bottles of material. So I'm going to have one of my cups here is going to be set up for the A side and our B side. We're going to mix our color in our B side, and then we will proceed to pour it in. Again, a vacuum chamber would be great. I may put one of those together in the near future just to give it a shot. So if I turn this on with my cup on there, it zeroes and tars out at that point. So I'm going to go ahead, open this one up. And we're going to pour in 8.5 ounces. Repeat the process with this side. This is my B side of the material, so this I'm going to add my color to. I think this time we'll do blue, why not? So it is a small little drop. I kind of go about, I don't know, see where that takes us. Chopsticks, I love chopsticks for stirring this stuff up. Works really well as far as I'm concerned. This particular resin has an open time of only 2.5 minutes, but it cures in 20 minutes. That means roughly I can get almost 3 an hour if I get myself prepped up. It all depends on how fast you can tear down. So I'm pre-mixing the color into this particular side of the component. Now again, remember we said we have 2.5 minutes, so this is going to be kind of a pretty quick procedure. Now that I've got the color mixed in, I'm going to make sure my mold is exactly where it needs to be. I'm going to add my next component, stirring while I do so. Let that drain out of the cup. Going to keep stirring, keep stirring, keep stirring. And set this down over here. Keep stirring, keep stirring, keep stirring. And then we're just going to simply pour into the top of the mold until it fills all of the cavity. I do have some material left over. That's not a big deal. I'm going to let that sit there. Now this is rather interesting material. If I need to add a little bit more, I certainly can. I think I'm going to leave it right there. I'm going to bring you over, take a look at what I've done. I've more or less let it flow down into all of the areas. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to take a little ratchet. Try to get out any air bubbles. You'll note it appears as though maybe this side of the mold is a little bit low. Doesn't matter. This is pretty much self-leveling, and that's just the height it'll be. If I would like to, I can certainly add a little bit more material in there, make it a little bit thicker. But in just a moment, this stuff is going to start curing. And once that starts happening, it's kind of an amazing process. Let me... started the curing process. It is hard already. So we'll come back in about half an hour and see what it turns out to be. All right, our resin has all cured up. It's now time to break it open and see what we have out of this. I should probably pull a screw out of here. Pull a screw out of here. Now these two should come off. I should be able to get my whole mold right on out. We did have some leaking through the screw holes. You can see that right there. Came all the way down to the table. Pull it out of the form. And pop. And there we are. Custom handhold, custom cliff hanger. It's got my shield in it. Looks like I do have a slight flaw there in my mold. So what I can do is just now that once this is done, I'll just go in and pop that little bubble right off. Looks like I got two more down here. So a little bit of cleanup. Boink. 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 Ta-da! Kinetic Ninja. I don't know. COVID cliffhanger. Now the back is still a little rough and my holes don't go all the way through. I'll hit this with the sander, mount it up just to flatten off the back. I'll hit it on the sander, mount it on up on the wall, and let's see how it feels. There you go. Sanded the back, screwed it up onto my mounting board, my little climbing station. Feels rock solid. I love the texture. I think it's going to be a great training tool, something I can work around, play on, have a lot of fun with. And now I can produce as many as I want. And I got a plan along those lines. Stay tuned, but I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and stay strong, stay safe.